Hi, class. It's great to meet you guys, and thank you for taking the time to just listen to my thought process and listen to my presentation as a whole. And when Professor told us about this assignment, I really wanted to speak to something that's near and dear to me and something I can relate to. And being a finance major, I wanted to pick the economy. So the title of my presentation is going to be Representation of Minorities in Economic Inequality in Financial Markets. Now, I know it's a big title and I know it sounds very big, but I'm going to try to simple it down to my best of ability and trying to share my viewpoints, try to make it so that you guys can understand it. Now, I'm not going to be reading off the slides per se. I'm going to read like the key points, but I really want to share my research mainly with you guys face to face. So my first slide, what is economic inequality? Economic inequality is unequal distribution of income and opportunities between different groups and societies. Now, wherever you go in Long Island and whatever you look at, you can see how the rich have a lot more than the poor. And that goes with everything in life, whether that be grocery stores, whether that be the schools we go to, whether that be the first responders that we have, and even, frankly say, even the sanitation. Now, I'm going to use different towns of Long Island to really show an example of this and how economic inequality affects us on Long Island itself and New York itself. When you go to Garden City, they have the best of the best. Their streets are clean, they have beautiful fire trucks parked inside their garages, they have amazing school systems, and they have resources that are abundant to them. And they have their own police force too, Garden City Police Department. But now if you go to like a town like Elmont, which I live by, it's not as best. The streets aren't as clean. There's not enough resources for the town itself. They're always having some financial difficulties. And unfortunately, they have one firehouse with one fire truck. Now, they do have another one which they share with another town, but realistically, when a fire situation does happen, their response time is slow due to that. And that really comes to show you what economic inequality is in our state itself. Now, my next slide is, what is representation? So my main goal and my main thing that I'm talking about in this whole presentation that Professor wanted us to talk about is representation. That's what I chose. What is representation? Representation is when representation is the way aspects of societies such as gender, age, or ethnicity are presented to audiences. Now, when we look at this, we really want to think about, how are we representing our society? How are the leaders of our world representing our society as a whole? Different people represent different things. Like the Democratic Party represents one thing, the Republican Party represents another thing, third party represents another thing, and everything affects us as a whole. The way that we represent ourselves as a people, as a united nation, that is how the world perceives us. That is how groups perceive us in our own places. The way that us, SUNY Old Westbury, represents our school is much different than how Hofstra might represent each other. A quote that I want to go to is by Bell Hooks, where she said, "Representation is a crucial location of struggle for an exploited and oppressed people, asserting subjectively and decolonization of the mind." When we don't represent the people that need it the most, we are not being fair to each other. Everyone demands equal representation, whether they have the most money in the world or whether they have no money in the world. At the end of the day, we're all humans and we deserve equal representation no matter what. It doesn't matter about the color of our skin, it doesn't matter what sex we are, it doesn't matter how we identify as a gender or sex. Everything goes under the fact that we are human and that we need to be represented as a whole. That is how we were created and that's how it should be. My next slide is understanding minorities in today's market. Now, there's a bunch of bullet points that you can look at during this topic, but really what I want you guys to focus on is what I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to hit these slight little points. When we look at minorities in our financial market, we can see how undervalued it is. When I was doing my research and I was looking at these articles online and these peer-reviewed studies by different colleges, I've noticed that people of color and people of minorities have less financial wants, or less financial help in per se. Like, they don't have as much money as people of non-minorities have, and it's hard for them to get the resources that they need to retrieve that money. So when we were looking at a research at PET, we can see how minority-owned businesses don't get as much funding as others might will. Mom and pop shops owned by minorities don't get enough money to a point where they can keep their doors open. Their property taxes are usually a lot higher. They don't get enough credit rating. So a lot of this affects their class, affects us as a people, because we don't get enough funding like the way we should have. These groups of people struggle with their own very simple opening up a checkings account. Like, they can't open up a checking or savings account because the bank won't allow it. Now, that is illegal, but it still happens in today's society. Now, the next topic. Problems the poor face in this financial system. Now, when we look at this financial system, we can see how drastically poor communities or low-income communities are having and just thriving and living in today's world. When we look at low-income communities, we can see how there's single moms out there working 2-3 jobs to just keep a roof over their head and to put the bare necessity of food on the table. And when I say bare necessity, I mean like a packet of ramen with some spices on the side for the kids. And that's not enough to live off of. And looking at how the wealthy are funding our communities, it's just not there. There is no funding. It's just like, you can figure it out yourself, or try your best, get another job. But that's just not how it can work in today's society. And time again, we can see this issue come across every single platform. And that's a big thing that happened in our recent election, where the biggest topic was how can we help the lower income and middle class when they're already struggling on itself. So we can see also high interest rates, and we can see how these interest rates are affecting the families not being able to afford a home. Kids out of college that are getting married, they can't afford a home. They can't even afford an apartment. If you go to New York City nowadays, it's $1,300 just for like a bathroom and 1 bedroom. It's extremely expensive. So we can see how even people that are only making 50 grand a year just can't live off of that. And single moms and single dads are just struggling day after day to feed their children, which shouldn't be the case. Which brings me to my next point. Representation in rulemaking and regulation. Now, what does that mean? In today's society, the federal government and the state government, they have rules and regulations in place to make sure that people are represented for financially. Policymakers must make laws that help build communities no matter their social economic class. So, that be welfare checks, that be social security benefits, that be retirement benefits, that be food stamps. These are all set in place by the government so that people of low income that need stuff can get it. So food stamps help with people getting food. Welfare checks help with people getting money if they can't get a job because they're disabled. And the government put this into place so that there's people that are suffering, that are in need, do get the help they can. Now, is there enough of it? No, unfortunately there isn't. And I feel as if we continue on this path, there never will be. There was an act that was put into place called the CRA Act, which is the Community Reinvestment Act, which makes major banks and local banks reinvest into lower income communities. Now, the banks that we see on our streets and our blocks, they must reinvest into our communities. Like Bethpage Federal Credit Union, they reinvest a lot into Long Island itself to keep the infrastructure up, to help these communities out, to give more loans, to give more credit ratings. This is how a bank maintains our society as a whole. If a bank was not regulated to do that and they just hoarded their money to themselves, we would hit another Great Depression like we did in the 1920s, and it would be really tough for us to just thrive in our environment. And moving on to my next slide, which is educational representation for finance for low-income communities. Now, when I was growing up, and my family is immigrants, both of them are immigrants, and I'm a US-born citizen in my family for the first time. And there's one thing that my father and my mother always say. They wish that they knew stuff about finance. And we can see when my parents are in a low income family at the time, they got no education for what finance was, how to manage their money, how can they get these loans, what can they do so they don't get these high interest rates. And what happens is banks scam minorities, specifically scam them into high interest rate loans that will cause them to have unnecessary amount of money, not even paying off the loan, but paying off the interest itself. And that's because they're not represented for. When these immigrants come into our country, and when firstborn citizens come into our country, they have no representation. No one's there to help them. They have to figure it out on their own. And it's sad because these people, even though they're coming in to help and to help build their infrastructure, they need the education and the trust from our people to see that, hey, we know that you don't know a lot about finance, but we can teach you. And if we had that representation, it would be so much better for us as a society as a whole, because then people will be knowledgeable about money. People will know where to spend and what not to spend. People will know what are great loans and what are not. And banks won't be scamming these innocent people of their money. So how can we do this though? This can be done in so many ways. This can be done through school, the classrooms, taking maybe one extra finance class to teach kids about what money is. This can be done through online courses that people can take for free via their community website. This can even be night classes for the parents that work 2 jobs in the day. They can come at night and learn about this type of stuff. Which brings me to my next point. Representation for the access to credit in minority groups. Now, while I was researching, I found something that really struck me, and I honestly didn't know this was happening. People don't get credit based on their race and skin color. Shocking, right? In 2024, that's still happening. Banks will not give people credit because of them being a minority. When you check off the box what race you are, they look at that stuff for this reason. We can see how non-minority people are getting like $5,000 worth of credit, and we can see the same people in the same tax bracket only getting $2,000 because of their skin color. And because of this lack of credit history, they can never fulfill their needs. One, because they don't have enough money to borrow from, but also 2, their credit history shows that they're not borrowing anything because they have no money to borrow. So if changes are made in our credit system as a whole, we can see how great our country can become when it comes to that end. And we can see how minorities can be heard. So we need to represent and show representation to these big banks that, hey, you need to give us the same credit rating as everyone else and not base us off the color of our skin, the sex, or the race that we might be. And this brings me to my next point and my next slide, which is systematic basis in financial markets. Basically, representation of us as people in the financial market. We can see how people of lower class don't get enough representation. They're just pushed under the rug. They're like, oh, we can deal with you later. We'll give you a little bit of money. Just live off of that. While the rich, they get all the representation. When you look at every single news report, and when a journalist is talking to these people on Bloomberg Marketplace or Yahoo Finance or CNN or Fox News, it's always one guy trying to represent the population. By the way, that one guy is living in an 8-bedroom house that's worth $20 million with the $3 million car in his parking lot. Like, that's just not right. The lower class should be represented by its own people. The middle class should be represented by their own people. The people that make the same money as them, to show them, hey, I'm suffering, I'm not getting through this because of these issues. I have not some rich person that's saying, oh, because these people are facing these problems, we have to fix it. No, it should be the people that are facing the problems showing the problems. We need to be represented as a whole, as a community of saying, hey, we need help. I just want to bring your guys' attention to my third bullet point. Also, hold back from lower income communities in getting funding for building more infrastructure due to their representation in politics. Now, what I want to explain is, when infrastructure is built in towns, it's based off of how much money they have. When you have no representation of those people, they receive no funding for it. That's why certain communities have rundown buildings and certain communities have beautiful mansions, because those communities are represented for and that are shown like this is what Long Island truly is. But the people of the other communities don't get represented the same way. And this is honestly sad in today's society, because it just doesn't make us look right as a state. We need to equally represent each community, whether they be a high class community or whether they be a low class community or whether they be a middle class community. Everyone needs to be represented the same so that this systematic bias doesn't happen. And it brings me to my final slide: successful representation for minorities. Now, when we have successful representation, what happens in our society? One, people of minorities will feel more respected. They'll feel like they're more loved. They'll feel like, hey, we can actually approach everyone for our problems and not figure it out on ourselves. We have the resources we need. My children will be better off in society as a whole. And the research that I've found online through these studies that were done by these colleges found that parents that had more financial background, more financial education, did better off in their future. Now, how can we do this? Social media. We're all on social media. Guys, we're all on our phones. We should share on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook if you guys still use it. We should share on Snapchat and share our knowledge and share our experiences through our everyday life. There should also be politicians that are setting laws into place. Especially nowadays, we have to set laws into place that will help our communities, whether they be immigrants for the first time or whether they be people that's been here for generations. Everyone needs to be helped equally, no matter who they are, because at the end of the day, we are all human and we all need that help. Banks should be focused on supplying more money to communities, no matter what, and not hoarding money in their savings accounts. They should give more line of credit. They should be more fair in the judgment that they make on others and represent their community as a whole. Again, without representation, what happens? Our community falls. No one is represented in the fair way. And guys, I want you guys to look at these two questions, and if you guys have ever experienced anything, I want you guys to really elaborate and think about it. And if you read my description, you guys should have probably already been thinking about these questions, but I'm going to read it to you. The first question: how can financial systems actively address systematic biases in decision-making processes? Do you think it will get better with time? My second question: how could schools, governments, and private institutions play a role in promoting financial literacy? Do you have any experiences you can share in how you might relate to this topic? Now, guys, any experience, please put it in the description below so I can read and I can comment and other peers can get their ideas. And I just want to show you guys my last thing, which is my works cited page. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation and taking time out of your day. I know it's a bit long. It is 19 minutes long. I'm sorry for it. There was a lot to talk about. There was a lot to hit on the points. But I hope you understood everything that I talked about. If you guys didn't, please leave questions down below. I'm more than happy to respond. I honestly can say through this project, I found my true calling and what I'm going to do in finance, and I'm going to pursue that. And I'm going to make sure everyone is equally represented in our field. And I want to make sure everyone can be financially prepared in the future. Thank you, guys.